So last week in my Shadow Dark game, I had a character who was in a life and death situation. They had been knocked unconscious, and an evildoer had held his broadsword to her throat while she was unconscious and demanded that the other characters like drop their weapons and let him go, essentially. And they were pretty confident that even if he managed to try to escape, he was going to try to kill her anyway. He was a really bad guy. And I was stuck in this situation where I want the character to survive. The character's really, really cool, pretty integral to the story of the game. It would be bad if they died. And the players said, we're going to go after him because we think he's going to try to kill her anyway. And so I said, okay, let's roll a die. And on a 1 to 10, you are not able to get up to him in time. And on 11 to 20, you are. And to share the story, I had the player whose character was at risk roll the die, and she rolled a 20. And that completely changed the whole outcome. In fact, I said with a 20, turns out she wasn't unconscious, and she got to attack the guy, and she didn't attack him, but she opened up a portal to another world behind him, and a big crystalline sentient monster grabbed him and squeezed him like a juicer, and he was dead. And everybody lost their minds. It was really, really cool. That is one example of using this concept called an oracle die. An oracle die is essentially a 50-year-old idea, and it's, hey, if there's an element in the game that has some kind of probability to it, and you want to determine what actually happens, instead of you coming up with an answer yourself as a GM, you roll a die to see what happens. Many, many GMs figure this out on their own. You don't need me to tell you how to do this, but it's such a valuable tool that I think it's something worth talking about and discussing and like figuring out where we can do it. A very lightweight way of using an oracle die is determining which character a monster might attack. If there are 4 characters and there's a monster and it's not super clear which character the monster would attack, you roll a d4 and assign those numbers to individual characters, roll a d4, and whoever comes up, that's the one that gets attacked. That is an example of using an oracle die. But you can use oracle dies for all kinds of different things. And I wrote an article on Sly Flourish that I'm going to publish, but I wanted to talk about it here on the show too, because I think it's really valuable. And it's essentially like you can do all kinds of things with your oracle die. And really easy way is to basically say, start with something being a 50-50 shot. If you have a probability of something that's going to happen in the game and you're wondering, is this going to happen or not? Make it a 50-50 shot. On a 1 to 10, one thing happens. On an 11 to 20, something else happens. Or on odd, something happens. On even, something else happens. Or roll a d6. A lot of people say, grab any die. You'll see this in various books. If you ever want to figure this out, grab any die and roll it. And on an even, one thing happens. On an odd, something else happens. That way you don't even have to care what die you're rolling, because there's no d5 and d7. They're all even distribution dice for the most part. I think there's probably some weird dice out there. It's like a d7. Essentially, you could just roll a die, and on an odd, one thing happens. On an even, something else happens. Or again, if you roll a d20, on a 1 to 10, one thing happens. On an 11 to 20, something else happens. But the nice thing about using a d20, you can use a 20-sided die for this. And the nice thing about a 20, this is my great big metal D20. I think I got this from Easy Roller Dice. Yeah, Easy Roller Dice sent me this die. And it's really cool. Check out Easy Roller Dice. And the nice thing about a D20 is that it has a lot of like fluidity to it. That 1 to 20 has little 5% increments all the way from the bottom to the top. So instead of just saying like on an odd, one thing happens, on an even, something else happens, you could say like, I want to roll in the attitude of somebody. And on the lower the roll, the worse the attitude. And the higher the roll, the better the attitude. And then use it as almost like an analog gauge, right? You have all these sort of 5% increments. You don't have to decide what each one of them is. You could just say, okay, you go up to the town guard. How grumpy is he? And I roll a 7. So it's like, he's a little tired, right? He's not like super grump, right? But he's like, I'm a little tired. I've kind of dealt with people like this before. So it's like, what do you want today, right? But then, you go to the bar, and how's the bar? The person at the bar is a 13. No, they're pretty optimistic, right? They're okay. A 20 would be really optimistic. A 1 would be really not, like, I hate you already. I want to stab you in the eye with a butter knife. But like, you have a wide range, but you can use this for all different kinds of things. And so some examples that I wrote up in the article is like how alert the guards are. Are the guards really alert, or are they kind of asleep? What's the attitude of those guards? If you're, an obvious one is a morale check, right? Are the people going to run away, or are they going to stay and fight? Like, you beat down half of them, roll a die. The lower the roll, the more likely they are to stay. The higher the roll they are to run away, or vice versa. You get to decide. Are characters acting smartly or more chaotically in battle? That was an example where before he held the broadsword to her throat, I rolled to determine whether or not he was so wild he was just going to try to kill her and run. And instead, and if I roll high, he keeps his wits about him and tries to use her as ransom. So, that's an example where you can determine what that die is. Obviously, determining which character a monster might attack, that's a really easy one. Determining if a servant is in a room or not, right? So if you have a heist where the characters are kind of going from room to room, you might say, well, it's not necessarily a monstrous encounter, but I'm going to roll that the servants are going around, and there's basically a 1 in 6 chance that they're in any given room when I roll. Or you could say that there's a 1 in 4 chance. On a 1 to 5, the servant is in the room. On a 6 to 20, they're not. And then you roll a die and you determine that. Is a guard looking one way or the other? Good 50-50 roll. Like, are they looking one way? They looking another way. Maybe you say, like, the lower they roll, the less their attention is anywhere near you. The higher they roll, the more it's focused around the area that you're paying attention to. A 20, they're like staring right at you. So the type and severity of the weather. Now, there are weather tables that you can have, but you don't need a weather table. You can just kind of decide, okay, mild to severe. How bad is the weather, right? And you roll a 10, and you go, it's cloudy, and there's some rain that's coming in and out. A 20 would be like hail the size of golf balls is landing on your head. And 1 might be, no, it's a really pleasant day. So you don't even necessarily need to have tables to roll against. You can just roll the die and sort of pick things off of them. While determining the time of day. A lot of time you lose track. We've been in a dungeon all this time. When we come out, what hour is it? And you roll a die, you can roll a d20, and you go, it's about 7 a.m., right? So you say it's mid-morning. Like, you can kind of decide, is it mid-morning? Is it evening? Is it middle of the day? Is it first thing in the morning? When is it? So time of day, really easy one. Again, roll a d20. I know there's 24 hours a day. Don't worry. Don't sweat it so much. Just roll, and that's how late or early in the day it is. Decide if an object vital to the quest is here or has been moved. What are the odds that somebody would move it? And this could add a complication where they go into the final chamber to go get the idol that they need, but somebody got there first. What are the odds that someone got there first? You could say there's basically a 1 in 5 chance. So on a 1 to 4, the object was taken. You roll the die. I rolled a 15. It is still there. So again, you're tying these dies. You're tying these dice outcomes to different sort of elements to the game that could be randomly determined at different points of time. What path is the guard going to take to a dungeon? You could say, like, at any given fork, he's going to go this way or the other. You can sort of figure out the path that a guard is going to follow as they're going through a dungeon. Maybe it's always common, but maybe not. So that's what you can determine. So the Oracle die is a really good opportunity to determine random events in your game. And where it really helps GMs is it means you don't know what's going to happen. You're being fair with the world. You're assigning the probability. You're rolling the die, but you're being fair with the world because you're not determining things based on what you want or what you feel. Instead, you're letting the dice kind of determine this. Now, one thing is you don't want to generally use the Oracle die when the characters are involved in a situation. At that point, you probably want to switch to something like an ability check. So if it isn't, how grumpy a guard might be is a good reason to roll an Oracle die. How well the characters convince the guard of something is an ability check. At that point, you assign a DC. You might assign the DC based on that grumpiness check. Right? So you could actually say, for example, the DC is going to be rolled on a D20. The higher, the grumpier they are. You roll and you say it's a 17. You need to beat a 17 in order to convince this guard. So you could do something like that if you want. You could also just stick with your 10, 5, 10, 15, 20 sort of scale and determine it. But basically, anytime something in the world is randomly determined outside of the abilities of the characters to interact with, that's a good time to use an Oracle die. Anytime the characters are directly involved, you probably want to use some kind of check. In the very first example I gave, where I said that the Reaver was holding a bastard sword to the throat of one of the characters, and one of the other characters was going to charge them, I could have said roll a dexterity check. We'll say it's a 50-50 shot, DC 10, or we'll pick a static number based on the dexterity of the guy that you're going after, which would probably have been like 10 or 11. You have to beat that in order to go. That probably would have been more accurate. But on the other hand, having flat rolls can still work in that circumstance. So generally speaking, when the characters are involved, you probably want to use an ability check of some sort. You want to pick a difficulty class, pick a number for the DC, and then let the character roll an ability check with the right ability for it. But otherwise, if there's something random going on in the world itself that isn't based on the characters, that's a really good time to use an Oracle die. So an Oracle die is a fantastic tool to just help you let the game go in really interesting directions. You still get to determine what the various outcomes means, but it means that you you aren't in direct control of the story. Instead, it's you determining the story based on a die roll that you roll. If you want to learn a lot more about the Oracle die, I would definitely recommend taking a look at the RPG Ironsworn. Ironsworn was the first place where I saw the Oracle die being used in lots of different places. The Oracle die in Ironsworn is used when you're running as a solo RPG a lot. All the rules for Ironsworn are online for free. I will link to them in the show notes and you can check them out. And at your next game, try out the Oracle die. I think you'll really like it. If you enjoyed this show, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is the best way to see all of the material that I put out every week. You get a weekly RPG-related email with links to all of the other stuff that I do and the set of tips that I offer every week. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to things like the Forge of Foes tools, but a whole bunch of other tools, a whole bunch of different exclusive adventures. Awesome community over on our dedicated Discord server, and it helps me put on these shows. It helps support me directly, so please consider that. And you can pick up my books like Forge of Foes, Lazy DM's Companion, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Lazy DM's Workbook, and all of the fantastic books, including Ruins of the Grendel Route on the Sly Flourish Bookstore. Please check those out. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.